And during the inhale, again, like what I described previously, there's always this certain type of hum that tends to happen, this vibrational hum that not only you hear, but you feel. And certain perceptual changes with regards to the brightness of the light, the ambient light in the room. As I let out the first exhale, it was almost like a voice came to me, and I began to repeat this mantra to myself, which continued throughout the second inhale that I took. And it just kept saying, let her go, let her go, let her go. And upon the second and final exhale, I said to myself this kind of drawn out, let her go.
The following video does not glorify drug use, but instead it intends to promote harm reduction by discouraging the ignorant use of specific drugs, as well as harm elimination by discouraging certain people from using specific drugs altogether. There is no right or wrong way to consume these substances, but there are unsafe and safer ways, and what's more comfortable for one person may be more dangerous for another. Before watching this video, please understand that psychedelic experiences may not be entirely predictable, but that doesn't mean that bad trips and good trips are random. Rather, it means psychedelic experiences are influenced by factors such as the individual's given setting, and dosage at that specific point in their life. Therefore, you will not experience what these people have experienced, but you could potentially experience something similar. However, these are random people, so please do not make decisions based on what they say without your own due diligence. And also, take note, once again, that these substances affect everyone differently, especially those with pre-existing mental conditions.
About 4 months ago, my relationship with my ex had ended, and it was a really, and for me at least, it was a extremely hard breakup. And so processing through the trauma was a bit difficult just because of the type of relationship it was. Looking back on it now, there are certain aspects to my ex's personality that could qualify her for certain types of mental disorders. And relationships with those types of people can be extremely devastating. Yeah, for the past 4 months, it's been like a major obstacle in my life, but especially for the first 2 months. And I had tried really hard to process through essentially what could equate to a grieving process, but it wasn't working. And I had intended to not use any psychedelics to try and overcome this. I felt I had the mental fortitude to do it on my own. Logically, I understood what was going on, but again, relationships with these types of people can be extremely complex, and the level of complication, I guess you could call it, with regards to trauma bonds to these types of people and how they affect you on various aspects. It was just too overwhelming to deal with, at least for me. So I had decided that maybe, I could utilize some of the sacred medicines to help me at least process what was going on and help me overcome them. So initially, in the beginning stages of this process, this is when I had experimented with my first dose of natalensis, which was totally unrelated to what I was going through. I was just assessing it. But in utilizing natalensis, the setup for it was I had the predetermined day, and to try it out when I had felt better. I didn't want any psychological interference from what was going on or what was going on to interfere. So it was I'm not sure exactly which day of the week, but nice, beautiful afternoon. Was in a pretty good mood, and utilizing a simple tea extraction, extracted 1.5 grams of natalensis for bioassay and ingested the tea. Onset was extremely fast. I started to feel it within 15 to 30 minutes. And for the first hour, or maybe 45 minutes, it was what people attest to. Very extremely fun. Music, put on some music, vibing well with the music, felt and sounded amazing. But at about the hour to hour 15 mark, some of the trauma related to the relationship started to come up. And I started to question myself, question the relationship. But there was this underlying sense of almost like a voice telling me to look at this a different way. And while in the midst of the trips, I started to pull up photos of my ex and look at her. And at about the hour and I started looking at photos of her and just noticing certain details about how we were interacting in these photos, and started to have just a different perspective on the relationship. And at about the hour and a half minute mark, the trip had somehow intensified, and I had to lie down. And in lying down and closing my eyes, I started having closed eyes visuals of almost like my ex coming to me, but her form started to shift into like this really grotesque, kind of like monstrous entity that kept trying to scare me away. And part of me was like, oh, this person is very gross. Like, why would I want to stay with this? But then this voice that was present throughout the trip kept telling me, like, are you afraid of her? Like, do you want to run away from her? Or do you actually love her? And so in the presence of this grotesque monster, I remember I could, like, almost in a way see through this monstrous form and see her inside of this thing crying out for help. And in that moment, I knew, like, I actually loved this person, and I would be like a horrible person for trying to just run away from somebody who treated me so negatively. And this went on for about, in real time, about half an hour until I started to come down. And strangely enough, during the come down, I had received a call from somebody who hadn't talked to me in about, I would say 10 years. And I guess they were going through a hard time in their life, and I was able to effectively communicate with them in the midst of the come down. And later on, I found out they were actually going through a hard time in their life. And I don't remember the specifics of what I was communicating to them, but it was very beneficial to helping them through their own issues. And following the experience, I felt very rejuvenated. I had, come to this realization that, I actually genuinely love this person who I was having issues with. And I had been in no contact with her for about 2 months. And something about this trip was like, try and reach out now. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in the way I had intended. It actually created a more negative dynamic between us and created a more negative situation, at which point, unfortunately, things got worse. And so about a month later, which is when I posted my Reddit experience, again, things had gotten substantially worse. I was somewhat more confused because the initial experience I had with the natalensis, gave me hope. And, following my subsequent interaction with my ex, it just like crushed all that hope I had generated. And it made me begin to question, like, do these substances really even work? Like, why would the sacred medicine tell me to do this, and then only for me to get more hurt? Or like, did I misunderstand what the message really was? So it created a lot of self-doubt and confusion. But again, I had reached a point where I was just like, I really need help right now. And having previously experienced more benefit from DMT compared to psilocybin, I decided, it was now time to try another dose and see if I get a different message. So it was, again, sometime in the afternoon or early evening, and I decided to take a dose of vaporized DMT. I have generally a specific area where I utilize my DMT just because it's comfortable. It's a very safe area, allows me to just lie back and not have to worry about anything. These days, I prefer to utilize, my administration preference for DMT is using a device developed by an individual who goes by the name of Gordotech. But I didn't have access to that device at the time. So I believe I utilized a glass vapor genie I had purchased a while back. The specific dose was about 30 to 40 milligrams. I wanted to keep it low because I didn't want a breakthrough dose. Again, just because I feel it's not necessary. And with regards to the setup, something I tend to do now is be more focused on intention. Specifically, messages I hope to, I guess, actually more questions I hope to have more insight on specific questions. So prior to firing up the vapor genie, I just made it clear in my mind, this is what I want to focus on. This is whatever entities come to me, this is what I want to talk about. And when I had that set in my mind, I fired up the vapor genie, and during the inhale, at least the initial inhale, again, like what I described previously, there's always this certain type of hum that tends to happen, this vibrational hum that not only you hear, but you feel. And certain perceptual changes with regards to the brightness of the light, the ambient light in the room. As I let out the first exhale, it was almost like a voice came to me, and I began to repeat this mantra to myself, which continued throughout the second inhale that I took. And it just kept saying, let her go, let her go, let her go. And upon the second and final exhale, I said to myself this kind of drawn out, let her go, at which point I didn't necessarily blast off, but I transitioned very gently into that hyperspace dimension. While there, it wasn't extremely overpowering like a breakthrough dose, but as I described in my post, I was, let's say, visited by geometric entities. The only way I can describe them is very squid-like and jellyfish. It's almost like a combination of a jellyfish and a squid just floating through hyperspace. In my most recent DMT journeys, they tend to be pretty common. They oftentimes come to visit me, and in a way, it's like they always come to do some kind of like operation on my brain or go into my brain somehow. It's almost hard to describe. But this time they didn't do that. And I'm not sure how long I was in this space with these squid-like entities, but at one point, one of them almost, I wouldn't say possessed, but entered my body and started, and it was almost split into two. And then one aspect of one body was inhabited by this entity, and it started to like talk to, I don't know if it would be considered like a projection of myself or just another copy of myself, but I described it as it was like myself talking to myself, but at the same time knowing like I'm talking to myself, which I found pretty hilarious in the moment for some reason. But in this process, the entity communicating to me, or if you want to say I was communicating to myself, basically was telling me like, it's time to accept that this is over. The person you're in love with doesn't really exist. And again, if you understand the type of dynamics with people with the type of personality disorders that I perceive my ex to have, I kind of understood in that moment, or it finally resonated, that the person that even in my Natalensis dose that I was in love with, that person doesn't exist. It's just a mask that was worn that to cover the real self. So essentially, I'm like in love with somebody that doesn't exist. It was hard for my secondary self to hear that because I didn't want to accept it. But the self that was, housing this entity was like, it's okay to understand that, you're not a weak person for feeling this way and all that, but it's okay to let it go. So just let her go. It's time to move on with your life. And in a similar message to what I experienced in my first trip, this entity basically recommunicated that you're not alone. You don't need to feel alone. We're still here with you. We'll always be here with you. In the moment and following the experience, I realized that this message tends to come up a lot, probably because of my own underlying trauma. Could be from my childhood and abandonment issues from previous relationships or whatever. But in that moment, like, I knew this is something I really need to work on going forward. I have some type of issue with going forward in the world alone, or I make these connections with people who may not be the best for me, or may be toxic in their own ways, that I get so attached to them that when they do leave, I end up feeling alone rather than being secure in myself. And so in that moment, I started to come back to baseline and return to, return to this realm. And I felt this overwhelming sense of just resiliency and fearlessness and, just confidence in myself. And in that moment, as I returned to complete baseline, I just felt very empowered and that I could do this. When finally everything subsided, the feelings of depression and overwhelming senses of attachment to my ex had substantially gone away. And I felt like, I could move on. And since then, again, like I said previously, these substances aren't always a cure-all for people, but it has provided me with the confidence to maintain certain aspects of moving on, not feeling the desire to reach out to my ex, not trying to reconnect, and just, giving me the motivation to move on with my life and let her go. I think that was the most beneficial aspect of this journey over the past 4 months. Is it took a while, but with the help of, my last DMT journey, I felt I was able to transition from one aspect of the grieving process, specifically towards the grieving of the relationship, towards the final stages, and finally move on with my life.
Since then, how have you, as far as like the long term or short term effects afterward? Are you still, is everything still good, and has anything else popped up?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if, I mean, I'm sure your listeners, there's probably a lot of your listeners who have gone through these types of relationships, especially maybe going through these types of relationships. And it's important to understand that in these types of relationships, the influence on the deep influence on the psychology of the individual involved with these types of people is, greatly affected. So following my experience, I didn't have high expectations of, again, coming out of it like previous trips and just being like, oh, my problems are cured, which was actually the right thing to do because since then I have had flare-ups of related to attachment issues with her and missing her, still confused about the situation and whatnot. But I believe the trip significantly reduced the potential and intensity of what those flare-ups could have been like. Again, I'm not, for those who have been exploring in this field, they know that the ability for these substances to promote neuroplasticity and just have different perspectives on situation played a major role in me being able to understand it better than I was before. So yeah, I feel that following the experience, while I did have some, I guess you could call them slip ups and flare ups, I've been I've been able to substantially process them in a more positive light than I was previously. So it's not having as much of a negative effect on me as it was before. But there are still instances where it comes up, but I'm able to work through it significantly better.
With one of my past relationships. Well, I guess it was my first main one really. After it had concluded, or it was starting to conclude, I had found it very hard to let go of that person for the pure fact that I felt like they were a part of me, and I was convinced of that at times, and which arguably they might have been to some extent. They had contributed at the time to who I was very greatly.
Yeah, I know that feeling, man. Well, if what you went through is similar to what I and many people go through, um, the reason why I say relationships with these types of people are so complex is because with this certain type of individual, especially with this type of, possibly this type of disorder, specifically personality disorder, part of their lure, what draws you in, is that for many people, what they provide to you is something that is irresistible. The way I've learned it from experts is it's it's almost impossible to resist for any normal person. And it's these feelings of, facilitating the ability for you to love yourself through their eyes. So the way they treat you and when times are good allows you to, for the first time for many people, allows you to love yourself because, the way they're treating you conveys the sense of like, wow, I'm an amazing person. Wow, they think I'm handsome or beautiful. So I feel like I'm a beautiful or handsome person. So you start to have all these senses of self-love. And secondarily, they provide to you something that you only experience in childhood, which is unconditional love. That even with all your faults, again, when times are good, especially in the beginning stages of the relationship, when times are good, they still love you regardless. And they love you for who you are rather than what you are. And so these two aspects of love are irresistible to most healthy and even unhealthy individuals. And when things start to get toxic and they take it away, it's almost like a drug addiction. And that's why oftentimes many people can't get out of these types of relationships, or when people are cast out of these types of relationships, it's almost like going through severe addiction withdrawals. I feel that's what I was going through, and in line with what people experience with drug addiction and the use of these substances, I felt it was very beneficial towards helping me at least process through the harder aspects of the addiction, in this case to a relationship. And, like any addict, sometimes you slip up. And in my case, it's missing her, wanting her back or whatever. But because of the perceptual change And because now I'm more able to tap into my logic and process it more effectively, it's not as bad as the initial stages of the breakup. So yeah, man, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but hopefully, you're in a better place now going forward with your experiences. I hope these types of situations don't affect you as that one did.
Yeah, yeah, I greatly appreciate it. I definitely have moved forward quite a good bit of time ago.
Oh, good. Yeah, yeah, that's good, man.
And one thing that I thought was very interesting is how you brought up self-love, because that was a very big theme among the lessons I've learned after that experience concluded.
Oh, yeah.
Because I had realized, just as you described, I that was the exact case where I did not have self love for myself, because I was younger. This was a high school relationship, but it was also, it was like it started like at the end of freshman year, start of sophomore year, and it had concluded kind of like throughout the course of senior year.
Hey, that's still 3 years, regardless of age, man. That's a huge commitment. So, regardless of your age, you know, it's it's easy to understand why it had such an impact on you.
Yeah, and I just like exactly as you said, I had become dependent upon her for, I guess, happiness, to see how I could be loved through her eyes. I feel like that was a great lesson to learn after the relationship concluded, was it how much it made me realize like how like self-love is like so important for a relationship, that independence.
Yeah, it's the most difficult thing is that I've learned through both having to go through therapy for this issue as well as my psychedelic experiences with these issues is that people often it's easy for people to tell people going through these hard experiences, especially relationships like this. You just got to love yourself more. You got to learn to love yourself. You just got to go out and enjoy yourself. But it's not that simple because self-love is something that, the catalyst and the actual processes happen in childhood. It happens when you start to form your identity, when you go through this process called separation individuation, when you're essentially a toddler, when you're learning to become your own person. So if you don't learn these processes at that age, it's very difficult as time progresses to learn how to do this unless you have, the right people in your life guiding you through it. The fact that, I mean, you should take a lot of pride in the fact that you are in a better place and you have a different perspective. And hopefully you do have more self-love for yourself, man. And, whatever you went through with that particular relationship, you're able to grow from it. And that's a huge issue for people is they don't have the potential to grow from it. And they have to go through the same subsequent type of relationship until they get guidance from somebody like yourself who's gone through it and can help them process it more logically, at which point, you act as how their parents should have acted and teach them how to basically learn how to provide themselves with self-love. So hopefully you're at that stage too, man. I know it can be rough. And like a huge lesson I learned is we always have three types of love in our life. The first one is just like kind of like the puppy dog love, where it's just like kind of like kids who fall in love. Second one is, the love that hurts you, where you think this is the one, and then they end up like completely shattering you. And then the third type of love is your true love, which comes to you when you least expect it, when you're in those places in your life, when you finally, get to a point when you have true self-love and they'll come into your life. So hopefully, I mean, if you haven't found it already, you're at that point of self-love and something might come to you and she'll be the love of your life.
I since that whole thing concluded, it's been quite a while now. So yeah, I've definitely, I would say I have a very strong self love as of now.
There you go, man. That's what we like to hear.
Appreciate it.